Welcome to Making Things Right, an invitation to restoring LGBTQ plus faith. I'm your host, Brian Nitzel. If you're tired of the debates and the division around faith and sexuality, if you're interested in more productive ways to engage and solution together and bridge divides between Christian and LGBTQ plus communities, then I think this is for you. So welcome to the table and welcome to Making Things Right. Stories. We all love them. It's why we read books and watch movies in search of characters that we can relate to and learn from, to be encouraged or challenged to do better. At the center of the Making Things Right project are stories. The third episode in our podcast series is all about knowing our stories and the common experiences of LGBTQ plus individuals within the church. So I'm going to play you an excerpt from that episode of one story in particular. And I invite you to have a seat, to get quiet, and really listen to the story of my good buddy, Caleb. Well, most people expect you to be a guest to share about your story, what you're going to, but what some people don't know is that you're my official partner in crime with the Making Things Right project. You know? Mm-hmm. So Caleb is, how long have I been talking about doing what we're doing right now?
We're at least measuring in decades,
right?
You know, it's been more than several years where it's just been always in the back burner.
Yeah. And unlike my other guests who are new friends, Caleb and I have a long history, which I'll talk about in a second. But he's always known that I've had this passion to talk about my story and how I love the church community and how I love the queer community and how I like to live in the tension in between and to help facilitate more productive conversations and all of that stuff. But I just never, and I always had this nagging conviction, remember, to write and to do some of this work a little more formally and to create some resources for people to grab onto. Yet it just, I don't know how things in life are. And I was hanging out with Caleb in that plant-filled loft about a year ago, right now.
Yes.
And I watched you in action because as a vocation, Caleb is a brilliant creative marketing director. And I was watching him do this for this other project, this other person where he's launching something. And I just, in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, I wonder if he could help me with my dream. And we just started talking about it. And Caleb's like, let's go. You just give me the word, buddy. And I remember I sent you a text in February.
Yeah.
Where I just said, I'm ready. And we've been off to the races ever since. And so even though I feel like the voice of Making Things Right, the brains and the heart behind it is Mr. Caleb, who had just such a wonderful vision to create this podcast series and help me craft the white paper and to create different resources for people. So I really appreciate you. Our story started a whole long time ago. I met Caleb when he was 9 years old and I was 23 or something. And both our sets of parents were friends and they were going to this little evangelical free church outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And that's when I met Caleb Hudson. It was crazy. And then we've had some, we've been friends in different seasons ever since. It's funny. So wherever you want to start, Caleb, just, we'd love to know a little more of your story.
You know, remember the moment when you met me and I had that sort of same looking up at you and looking up at this kind of wide-eyed, like, wow, I really looked up to you. And that was actually, I think back about that, and that was like probably 3 years after I accepted Jesus into my heart, which happened at 6 years old over mac and cheese. And I had that
everybody should accept Jesus into their heart over macaroni and cheese.
That was my conversion story, a 6-year-old at the table eating mac and cheese. And I grew up so immersed inside of everything that meant inside the conservative Christian world. And I would later go on to be homeschooled and had a growing understanding of my own sexuality that became apparent to me by the time I was 13 years old, and a crystal clear understanding that I was gay, even at such a young age. Mm-hmm. But I'm inside of a culture in a church that's like talking about it, and they're talking about homosexuality as if anyone who is possibly gay is outside of those walls because gay is other. And so I got to hear very unfiltered comments from people that were talking about gay people like they weren't in the room, even though I'm sitting there with understanding that they're talking about me and absorbing all these words, observing all the real thoughts about the way it's viewed to be gay.
Yeah.
And, that's, and as an early teen, that was incredibly impactful for me. I would, by the time I'm 15 years old, get to the place where I just was desperate for it to go away. And I would pray all the time relentlessly and beg God to take it from me. And I was doing everything right. I was going to every Sunday school. I was a part of my church. I was in the youth group. I was volunteering as a leader for this kids program. And I was at church, 4 days a week. And everyone I knew was connected to that system in some level. And I knew that it wasn't right. I knew that that's not what it was supposed to be. And I was really, really concerned that I was going to forever be in hell. And that was, if I couldn't figure it out, the consequences for me were enormous. Like I was looking at an eternity of torture. I was just looking at like, it couldn't have been any more grave. And I remember feeling like, overhearing conversations with the youth group leader around someone in his world who he had found out was gay, and the disgust that he was talking about, just the pure disgust. And by the time I'm 16 and listening to what people think about gay people, and certainly almost vilified people, that a culture that they called the lifestyle, that was out to somehow take something from the conservative Christian world. And there was a real fear about that. Around this time, Ellen comes out on her sitcom, and my mom made a huge deal of like boycotting Disney because Disney owned ABC. And we went to like group gatherings where like a lot of concerned moms got together to figure out how to best boycott. It was a real concern that the gay lifestyle was being advanced and that this was being portrayed as normal. And it was really urgent that the church had to come together because this could not be viewed as normal. It wasn't normal. It was not right. And we needed to take an active role in ensuring that people did not see being gay as normal. And I remember shortly thereafter, on a Wednesday night, being at church when all the lights were off in the sanctuary. I was, the last one there, probably waiting for a ride. The church had a large cross that was hung over the sanctuary, and it was lit up by the moonlight. And I was so disgusted with myself, and I hated it so bad. I remember crying and just endlessly crying, like real big tears, like not understanding why I'd been begging about this, praying for it, and why it still was there, like why it wasn't going away, why it was only getting worse for me, why I was just like still struggling. If it was this bad and I wanted to get rid of it this much, like why was it so silent? Why was God so silent? And I've never felt so alone in my whole life. 2 years after that, I would meet the first person I'd ever met who also struggled like I did. Anytime it was referred to in any context, it was only seen as a struggle.
Yeah.
Struggle was the only word conveyed to what I, had sort of like hell that I lived in. And it was a hell. It was a hell. It was because it was like this awful thing that I hated about myself, and yet it wouldn't leave me alone. And I felt that I'd done something wrong, or that something had been done, around me or to me. There was no fault of God's. God doesn't make people this way. It happened to me. I was choosing it. I didn't know how I was choosing it. I kept trying to not choose it, but I couldn't shake it. And I was tormented by the voices around me that were always insisting that it was just something that apparently seemed to be so easy that it could just people should turn off, come to Jesus, be saved, and not have it, because to not have this in your life was to be Christian. And so if I had it, like something was wrong. And I was like, this is such a, like, it was a constant inner turmoil place. And I remember in the senior year of high school, I would come to meet through a youth program, another senior in high school who had the same thing that I did. And we both had the same struggle. And for the, obviously it was a secret just for us. And we were like, now like at least inside, and that someone else had this struggle. We would pray together all the time.
How did you even find out that it was
like there was a moment where, like we had really become close. We become like best friends. Okay. And so there was like a moment between us that's how we found out.
Confided.
And we prayed together that first night that we kind of like figured that out about each other, and wait, you too, and me too. And like, oh my gosh. And we cried together, we prayed together, we tried to hold each other accountable. And we both went into conservative Christian colleges where the stakes were so high that if we were to be found out, there were major, major consequences. And I'll never forget the phone call I got from him when he'd been found out, and his school was threatening to, they were going to out him to his dad, who would have been an awful scenario for him. It was like, he couldn't imagine it. He was crying. He was hysterical on the phone. They said they were going to out him to his dad, or they would expel him if he didn't go to a camp. They sent him to a camp for a week. It's like, they're sending me away. They're sending me away. I still get emotional thinking about his voice on that call. And they're sending me away. And he went to a camp so that he wouldn't have to, they wouldn't get outed. And he came back recommitted to dating girls, and something he, re-upped on his renewed energy to make sure that he was going to be straight. And we were together determined to be straight. And I did that. I ultimately at college met someone and would go on to marry her. And a few years into that marriage, I told her about my struggle. She was the first person who I told that I had this struggle in my life. And she received me with love. That was the first time I ever felt love, because I grew up inside a culture that love was predicated by me giving the right answers, and that if I showed up in the way that was acceptable, I would be loved. But I was loved only to the version of me that was allowed.
Yes.
And I knew 100% how people felt. There was no mistaking how people felt about me being gay or anyone being gay. I knew that the only way that I was loved is to make sure that they didn't know that. If they knew that everyone in my life, whether that be the high school friends that were calling me faggot or making fun of the way I talked, or the parents around me, or the church leaders that were all warm and loving and gushy on me, all of that was just because I gave them the version of me that was acceptable and that was tolerable and that they could consume. Yeah. And that anytime they said they loved me, I knew deep down in my heart, you don't love me. If you knew me, you'd be gone in 2 seconds. You don't love me. You're just saying that because you don't know me. And the only way I can make sure that you keep loving me is to ensure that you don't know me. And here I was, and I was finally pushing those boundaries and saying that to my wife at the time, that I had this struggle about being attracted to men, and her response was, I love you. And that was the first time that I ever felt true and fully unfiltered love, because I was fully known and fully loved in that moment. It changed my life forever. And we didn't break up at that time. We started to sort things out. And shortly thereafter, we sat down with another couple. They were friends of ours from freshman year of college. We'd now known them for 5 or 6 years, because at this point now we're all post-college, we're married. And I will never forget this. The guy who was, the link between us, he and I were very, very, very close friends. And so I knew all of his world really, really well. And he said, baby John. And I knew this was another one of his friends from Iowa. I knew he'd really been struggling with some major depression. I knew he was struggling with some substance issues. lately he'd been looking really progressively more unhealthy every time I saw him. Like you could just see in like all these changes that were happening. And so my says to me, like over dinner table, we're just kind of catching up. And he says, baby John's, he's gay. You're not going to believe this. And, obviously on our side of the table between my then wife and I, she knew that was something that, that was a me thing, but of course, they didn't know that. And so we're just sort of silently stunned saying this. And we listened to the way that he talked about it. And, these were like our close Christian friends who were talking about this and just saying like, his wife just went off about how, she's like, how could it possibly be? He's been a Christian this whole time. I had no idea here this time. Like, I thought like he was saved and he really wasn't. And I've been trying to and now we have to figure out how to witness to him. We don't even know how to do that. Like, you think you know someone? And she was like, I just make sure that he will never be around my kids. I absolutely will never let him in the same room with them again. And then she said like 4 times, like he would never see the kids. And it was like he had a disease. He was like a cancer or something awful. And she needed to make sure that no one in her world caught what he had as if it was contagious. And I start crying. And then I just tell them at the table,
oh my God,
that that's me. You're talking about me. That's my story. And they looked so stunned. And then she tried to she tried to recover and say like, it was never about you and you're not like that. And like, I didn't know, I had no idea. They were stunned and speechless. My former wife started crying and, they did make an apology later. We left the dinner and they would later apologize. And they were no longer friends with me after that. They explained, that they're sorry that they no longer continued that friendship. It was shortly thereafter that I started doing my own version of conversion therapy, where I would then work. I went to the special version of it that was in Texas, and it was for married people. And it was in my continued attempt to try to fix whatever problem I had. At the time, I thought of it as SSA, or same-sex attraction. And I was trying to distance myself from anything called gay because I was trying to reclaim my original birthright in that of a straight man, which apparently I was born to be. And that somewhere along the line, a hose got kinked, and that I just needed to figure out where the kink in that was in the hose and solve the problem. And then it would flow again. And like, I would be the straight man that I always was, that God made me to be, that I was destined to be, that I could be. There were these success stories held up of men that figured it out, had 3 kids and were happily married. And so my wife and I joined this marriage group, and we, for years, went to these conferences, did these workbooks, had these small groups, went in these sessions, and I would do Bible verses and try to unwind my sexual sin, try to figure out where it originated. Was it with my mom? Was it with my dad? How did it happen? How do I become more like a man? How did I do this? And I would meet broken people that were just torturing themselves throughout this whole experience, that they were just trying so hard to be what they were taught they had to be, and that they had no alternative to be. And heard the most heartbreaking stories in that group. After 5 years of being, out inside of my marriage at the time, she really wanted to have kids. And we had a house by the lake and a fenced-in yard and a dog and 2 cars. And it just felt like the next logical step. But I couldn't go to that place. And that's the moment of authenticity for me, when I decided I'm exhausted. I don't know if God's cool with it. I don't know if I'm going to go to hell. All I know is I've tried my whole life to change this and to be what everyone, including God, wants for me. I can't do it anymore. I can't do it. And I don't need to and I had to make a big point of this at the time, that I wasn't even making the change because I wanted to live the lifestyle. And I kept saying that because I wanted to distance that. I didn't want the title gay. I didn't like that title because I still had so much baggage from it. Mm-hmm. And all I knew is that for the first thing I had to do was just say, this is in my life. This just is. It's always been there. And I can no longer like try to change it or commentate on it or love it or hate it or accept it or whatever. It just is. It seems to be a fixed thing in my life. And so that needs to be my starting point. I came home and got divorced, and then I started, taking years that would be unwinding all the things to realize that I didn't mess something up. My story wasn't broken. I didn't like ultimately do something wrong. I'm not a victim of my sexuality. I had to re-understand what it was like to actually love people without an agenda, without conditions, and learn how to give that love and receive that love, and unwind all of the voices that had sort of echoed in my past from the experiences. And it leaves me remembering, like, ultimately, I think so many times people were around me talking about gays because they were outside the room.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like such a good reminder, because there are people who are around you right now in your life who have some expression of this, and you just don't know. And you may never know, because they will never tell you. You don't actually know who you're talking to when you're talking to anyone. And, people would tell me about, in college, they would tell me about times where like we had to do a witnessing project. And so they would send people out to people that they needed to be witness to. And there was a whole group that went to meet gay people and try to witness for them. And they came back and did a whole report to the class on what it was like, and to meet gay people and, try to like win them for Jesus. And I think that was the common misconception of the gay people aren't outside the church. They're not outside the room. They're not outside the walls. They're just inside, and the stakes are too high for them to speak up. They were too high for me to speak up. The consequences for being brave or raising your hand and saying me too are way too high for many to make that decision. So I'm fortunate now that like I'm in a much better place, and I'm surrounded by people who love me in all aspects of me. And I get to be really vulnerable and authentic and transparent with people that accept me in all forms and facets of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I've carved that out far away from the church in a very safe distance that is like outside of all of the sticky expectations and, all of the terms and conditions of love. And so I've sort of found a safe refuge far, far away from that now.
Mm-hmm. You have tastes of that, though, through people, but not through any church experiences right now, correct? Or that's just not a part of your life,
that's
a
right.
faith community. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually tried a few churches when I got out of church culture, and I sort of was in my place where I was recovering, like how much of it, I was going to keep into my life. And I attempted to go to a few churches that were local to me in California, and I couldn't do it. I actually had, I guess I still have a bit of hurt and anger and all of it wrapped up inside that, institution and the culture of it. So I did make some attempts. And it reminded me of like what a scary, unsafe place it is to be inside those walls. And like, yeah.
I'm resisting to ask you a big question on the back end of your story, but I just can't help myself. So what this project is about, I can't even believe you've been my friend for so many years, and there's so many of your details I didn't know, Why in the name of heaven did you sign up for this? for which our primary audience is conservative to moderate Christians who are maybe just sort of interested in thinking differently. They're not ready to like march in a parade or anything yet, there are those folks that you were just talking about, but they're maybe ready to think a little bit differently. Why did you sign up for this, Caleb?
I think it was the biggest invitation because, of course, I love you so much. When you asked me to do this, I just thought, like, this is you. Of course, this is your dream. I want to do anything possible to make it your dream. And so I just signed up because it was your dream. And I had no idea how through the whole project, it would just make me reconfront things that I think I've needed to like heal and move on from. And just by being a part of this for the last several months, I've had to confront spaces where I just get really angry that I feel like we don't need to like make a big compelling case to ask people to just try to be kind humans. Like we shouldn't have to like roll out a red carpet. And then I have to like realize, where does that come from in me? Like, where do I get that? Oh, that's still unresolved space where I have rough edges in me, where I think the first thing you have to do is to get to a loving community, get far away from people that have expectations of you and they predicate their love based on principles, like get away from it. And then I think that that's not really the case. There are many people that I think feel compelled to, that there are many people that feel compelled to open their hearts inside. And you challenged me, Brian, to take a patient approach, to open your heart, to like hold space for people that want to like take steps on a journey.
Even if it seems they should be way farther along.
It really does to me. It feels like so self-evident to me.
You once told me, you're like, Brian, you set the bar so low. And I don't know why I have this crazy calling to have so much patience, but I just feel like if somebody doesn't, but I just have to believe. I just have to believe that it's not that hard to just love people and to get invited into a space where maybe you're going to find out that this is precisely what your theology can and should be about. So there it is, folks. That was, that was one of my best friends. And I didn't know half of the details of what he just shared. And he just chose to be really honest with us about the impact of church in his life and all that you just heard. So I just really hope that that you're brave enough to open up your heart to what just happened. And Caleb's tough story to hear, that still got some a fair amount of hurt. But he bravely steps into doing this project with me because he believes that we can make things right. So thank you for listening today. I hope that these stories helped you open your heart, because knowing these stories is the first step. And this is Brian signing off. See you next time.
Brian Nitzel is an author, speaker, and thought leader. To learn more, visit briannitzel.com or follow him on Instagram @BrianNitzel.